I want to try and communicate the importance of what's going on in B2B marketing right now. We're going through a major shift, complete disruption of the distribution of content and the communication that companies have the ability to make with their customers, and more importantly, the communication channels that have opened up between peers in B2B, which allows the communication and information transfer in a way that was completely different than what was happening 10 years ago. We're going to go through that in a lot more detail. And so to get it started, the dark funnel and what it means for you is that B2B buyers are researching, discovering, and evaluating products in places that companies can't track. That's the long and short of it. Examples of that are podcast, third-party events, community, word of mouth between peers, organic social, and other PR channels. The reason that companies aren't able to track them is because all of these things are happening in a third party where they don't have cookies or different things in marketing automation that they're accustomed to, that they've built a tech in order to track, right? And so the third party channels like LinkedIn has no incentive to pass me the data of all the people that watched my video, has no incentive to pass me the data of all the people that liked the video, or any of those different things. A podcast channel, Apple doesn't pass us almost any data, specifically about whether or not people are watching or listening to the podcast. And so because companies can't track these channels in the way that they're accustomed to tracking things with their traditional like marketing automation platforms, they actually don't even use them, or if they do use them, they don't take them seriously in a way where it's like these can be major business drivers. And I want to bring people back to the channels of podcasts, third-party events, community, word of mouth, organic social, PR, how people are making buying decisions, how people are understanding products. I would argue that those channels and the companies that execute on those channels well are the ones that are winning right now. If you just like think about the products, the brands that you like and where you actually discover them, you don't love brands because they're winning paid search. You don't love brands because they ran a LinkedIn gated ebook and then they cold called you a bunch of times when they did that. The brands that you like are distributing content that you like in these places. It's super fascinating to think about. And the main shift that's happening is built on communication. The evolution through the internet of the communication channels that allow B2B buyers to communicate with all of these different people. And I'm going to just really hone this in because I started my career in 2012, which is 9 years ago. And so at least my professional career. And so I'm going to break down what it was like in 2012. In 2012, B2B buyers would see peers once or twice a year at industry conferences and have very little communication with them otherwise. They couldn't get information on the internet or through peers in the way that they can today. And so the places where they went to get information were at industry conference presentations, through analyst firms like Gartner, or if they couldn't find it, they would go to Google search and look for it. That's what people did in 2012. And because that information was not abundant, and because that information was not in places where people could access it easily, they needed a sales rep to deliver them that information to help them complete a purchasing process. Those are the things that B2B buyers did. 9 years later, when we get to today, B2B buyers are hyper-connected daily on the internet through social channels and third-party communities all over the place. If you think about yourself as a B2B professional from today compared to just 5 years ago, how much more interaction you have with other peers that do your job and how much more content you consume on these places, it's just completely different. People get information through word of mouth of trusted peers, organic social, podcasts, events, and they have the ability to get all of the information that they want, whether it's through someone's website, on a social platform, through a peer or anything. They have the ability to get all of the information they need to basically make a decision about whether or not they want to buy something before they ever talk to sales. Anyone that's a B2B buyer, I think that would resonate with them. I personally, when I ask for a demo, as long as I can see the pricing, I pretty much have decided that I'm already going to buy that product. And I think a lot of people would agree with that statement. And so the next thing about communication that's really important is that when you compare it to 2011 and 2021, that if you have a really great experience with a brand and you really like a brand, your ability to tell other people is way different. Way different. I personally can go on and I can talk about a brand on a podcast, and I know that I can drive revenue for them that month if I wanted to. I know that I could post about how we use a tool, and each person, regardless of their audience size or different things, has the ability to do the same thing, and they do it subconsciously because they like the products that they use, and they want to tell other people because they've had a great experience about it. And so that's just like setting the table for the amount of communication disruption inside of B2B, which is now creating go-to-market disruption, right? And so traditionally, when companies would have marketing, which was basically built to get contact information so that sales could try to do sales to people that don't want to buy right now. That's what marketing used to be. That's what marketing is for a lot of companies still today, to what marketing actually is, where you can get someone to the place where they are bought into buying your product all the way through. I call it moving people through a buying process at scale in the way that they want on their own with no sales touch. That's what marketing is right now. When companies come inbound to us, it's not like they're comparing 3 or 4 agencies against us. They're either going to work with us or they're going to try and do it themselves. And I think a lot of companies should strive to have a product that's differentiated enough, to have a narrative that's communicated actively enough in the market, and to do strong product marketing and demand gen to a level where the people that are coming inbound to them and asking to request a demo are basically done. And if you adjust your marketing mix to do that, then you see dramatically shorter sales cycles. I've been seeing 50 to 67% shorter sales cycles in the businesses that I've worked for since 2017 when you operate this way. Companies that used to have a 210-day sales cycle going with outbound field sales in 2017, we started running this model and we had a 60-day sales cycle for the same deal sizes. And the scalability of that, if you keep operating on it, is way different than scaling sales. And so now I want to get a little bit more tactical inside of the channels. You see the way that we operate at Refine Labs. The things that we do at Refine Labs, the reason that we do it the way that we do is to model what companies should be doing. It was a really interesting sort of like light switch for me in 2019. I remember the exact situation. I was giving advice to a company that I was a consultant for, and I was recommending that they would start a podcast. And then I looked at myself and I said, we don't have a podcast. And from then on, I started to execute basically all of the advice that we give, we execute ourselves. And so the podcast at the cadence that we're doing right now, which is 3 times a week, is something that I think everyone should be doing. I talked to a company yesterday. They wanted to do it once a month. I told them, if you're going to do a podcast once a month, you might as well not do it. It's just not enough frequency. It'd be like, I want to get in shape. I'm going to go to the gym once a month. And so when you have these opportunities in these channels, it's very clear that when executed properly, these are the best things that a company could do. And so when you have these opportunities and you have to believe that they're the best things that you can do, and you have to be able to communicate that to the executive team, and then you need to move hard. That's why our company is growing so fast. Because it's not like we're doing a podcast once a month while we continue to do all the other dumb shit that companies continue to do that have been doing it for the past 10 years. We don't do any of those things, which allows us to stay super focused on the 3 or 4 things that are the major levers that can grow a business right now. And it's a really interesting recommendation for people if you think about it, because by the time that companies realize that, broadly, right, by the time it's commonplace, just like a company has a blog, that a company would have a podcast, which is probably going to be somewhere in the next 2 to 5 years, that a lot of the value and a lot of the volume and of the results that happened way before that. If you look at the people that started early blogs, like, they were early to something. If you look at the thing that we did on LinkedIn really early in 2019, when people weren't doing it, and the amount that we were able to grow over the past 2 years and then keep building on top of it, it's a skill as a marketer, because when you're doing those things well, like when I started on LinkedIn, and I'll go through this, when I started on LinkedIn, it was very easy because I had the mindset to be bought into the idea that LinkedIn is working. I have to produce content. I have to have a different mindset about what I'm trying to do, which I'm trying to help people so that they pay attention, so that they consume the content, so they understand more about the way that we see the world, so that they have a potential or a consideration to working with us or just doing it themselves. To be honest, there's way more people out there that take the information that we provide and just use it themselves and have success, which is amazing. The reason being is that when they have success, they tell a ton of other people, which leads me back to like the word of mouth component, which I want to go into a lot. Word of mouth between peers is by far the thing that drives the most B2B sales out there and gets almost no credit in attribution. I was talking with a MarTech vendor a couple of weeks ago. They actually did a survey. I would encourage anyone that's listening to this podcast or anyone that's live on this event to do this, to go through and look at all of the closed won deals that came through your website and call each of those individual primary contacts on the opportunity and ask them how they heard about you. And this company that actually did that had 50% or more that people said, I heard about you from this podcast. I heard about you from this person in Revenue Collective. I heard about you. Well, several of them said they heard about it from Refine Labs, right? And so, and how do you actually get that word of mouth action to happen is super interesting, right? There's at least a dozen people that I know of that recommend customers to us that have, Series D SaaS companies coming inbound to work with us. And the people that made the recommendation have never worked with us, don't know anything about what we do, or they probably know about what we do. But the reason that they're telling people is because the content is so on point. And so it gets back to the original part of the statement, which is the way that you move the needle on word of mouth is create content that commands attention. And the only way that you can start to create content that commands attention is to start to respect what the dark funnel actually is. I have a deep respect for it. Companies that are married to their attribution model will always struggle with this, because you can't track it, you can't attribute it, and it immediately, when executives go to audit and spend and activities, they're going to cut these things. They're going to cut the podcast. That's the first thing when I was an employee at a different company, the first thing that got cut was the podcast after 4 episodes, because we didn't have enough leads, right? And that's just because people see the attribution and don't see how it directly impacts revenue. And we need to change the mindset of both the marketers and the executive team about what we're trying to do during that process. When we get to trying to really communicate this to executives, I think a really interesting starting point that I've been recommending a lot recently for marketers is that you need to have a way to be hitting your goals first before you try anything in the dark funnel. That's what we do for customers. People come inbound to us and they're like, we want to work on a podcast, but we're $2 million in pipeline short for this quarter and we got 2 weeks left. And I say, there's no sense in starting a podcast right now. It's going to be the first thing that gets scrutinized and gets cut. You need to be getting to your goals first. So it's 2 things. Are the goals achievable? Or are there other things that you could be doing to hit those goals that have more direct attribution and more direct tie to revenue, which is why we start at demand. And even the way that we execute demand, I would argue that the way that we execute demand is pretty deeply in the dark funnel.